Dr. Jazz.
But yeah,
Dr.
you know,
Jazz.
I've talked to John Butcher the other day,
Oh,
and
okay.
you guys, I listened to the Stovelit Lines, the last one, which came out this year with Terry Day and Thurston and John Edwards.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I love what you guys did. And how did that group come about? I mean, this was just a one-time gig, or like?
I think it's a long. Yeah. I mean, you have to see it in the context of what's going on in London, which has always gone on, really, certainly since I was part of the scene, which is that there are lots and lots of people playing this music, and they tend to not be in regular groups.
Yeah, sure.
And if they are, that's a kind of exception, actually. So I know all those. I mean, of course, I have stories with all those musicians in that band. Clearly, I've been working with Terry.
Yeah.
I mean, we were in the Four Pullovers, for instance, in 1970 something. So I've been working with Terry for a very long time. I've known John quite a long time. I've known Thurston on and off. When Sonic Youth would come to London, I'd always bump into him on the tube or something, And who else is in that band? And John Edwards.
John Butcher, yeah. I mean, and John Edwards,
and
yeah, sure.
John Edwards as well, who, yes, I've worked with in many different things, movie soundtracks, all sorts of things. So it's not surprising that quintet came together. It wasn't like, oh, what? He's playing with him? I mean,
no,
yes,
absolutely, yeah.
We do all play together, yeah. But I'm glad it came out, and I think Shrike is a nice new label. Come on,
I saw that.
I mean, that's amazing,
Yeah.
And they already put out some very nice records, so I'm very happy about the whole thing. Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned when you got into the scene, if you compare, I mean, obviously there were less musicians maybe or back then.
Yeah. No, there were.
No, there were, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, of course there were. Yeah, there were fewer musicians playing this music, but it just keeps growing, actually. Yeah. I mean, there was a time when I had every improvised music record there was, and that would be impossible now.
Oh man,
I couldn't get it into my flat and I would never have time to listen to them all. Anyway. And I have a lot, but I don't. There's no way I could keep up with them all. So, if it was just stuff from London, I could.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy.
So London is, it's an exceptional situation, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All over Europe, I think, in the last 10, 15 years, the improvised scene really seemed to bloom. Quite many more festivals actually, and opportunities than maybe in the past. I mean, I don't know, at least my experience, like way more festivals at least.
Seem to be, don't they?
Yeah. So which is great, But I wanted to ask you, like, since you mentioned these early days, like, I don't know, late 60s, early 70s, I can think of Kenny Wheeler, John Stevens, Evan was already there, of course, and Howard Riley, Barry Guy. How did you enter the scene? I mean, what was your kind of introduction to the scene? How did that happen with you?
All right, so I was an undergraduate at York University from 1968 to 1971. I'd already heard of the Spontaneous Music Ensemble because they'd been on BBC. Now, what was it in those days? What was it called? Anyway, a radio program. There were two jazz programs a week, one on Saturday night, one on Sunday night. And I heard them, I think they started at 10 o'clock. So I was in bed listening to my transistor radio. and I listened to it pretty well. You know, both those programs, and the one that had actually sessions, it you know, commissioned sessions, as it were. I heard the Spontaneous Music Ensemble, the large version. I think David Toot was on that recording, for instance. I mean, I didn't know him then, but I think he was in that group. It was a large SME, and that just completely blew me away. And also, I heard, for instance, the first time I heard Cecil Taylor or Steve Lacy. The first time I heard Steve Lacy and Cecil Taylor.
Oh, that must have been.
They had a thing on the other program which was called Hear Me Talking, and it would just be a musician talking about their life and playing the examples. And of course, Steve Lacy was very good at that. And they played Johnny Come Lately. I didn't know it was a Duke Ellington tune, or is it Billy Strayhorn?
Yeah, one of those two guys. Yeah.
And I thought that was a great tune, but I'd never heard it before. And I thought what they were playing was amazing. So, I mean, for instance, I bought the second SME record, came out on an imprint from Island Records. I think it was the only record that came out on that imprint, and that was Carrie Obin. And I bought that record. So that's Evan Parker, Kenny Wheeler.
Yeah, everyone was on it. Yeah.
Eric Reilly, Dave Holland, although you can't really hear him on the LP, and John Stevens. And so by the time I get to university, I did know a bit about things, you know. And then I got a very bad degree. I really, really disliked being at university in terms of, I met lots of people, but basically the music department was, I shouldn't have gone there. Really,
you were studying classical, or? Well,
that's the issue, really. I think I got in just simply because I was probably one of the few people they interviewed who knew who Ornette Coleman was. And Wilfred Mellors, who was head of department, was interested in African American music and popular music. He liked the Beatles a lot, and that was absolutely unheard of in 1968, that somebody in classical music could take this music seriously in any way. So I think it was partially that, but I was one of the few, it felt like I was the only person who wasn't from London and who didn't live in a very large house. It was that kind of thing. And I always felt, you know, I'm in the wrong place. But after that, I had 3 years in York where I was very active with people in the university. And one of the things that happened was that we started presenting free improvisation in York University. The first thing that happened, and also I was in a band. The first band I was in was called Bread and Cheese, with Neil Lamb and Dave Hertzfeldt, both American musicians. And that was a free improvising band, piano, guitar, and drums. So there was that. And also we started getting musicians from London. Neil Lamb wrote a piece, which was like a sort of Berio sequenza, which was for Derek Bailey. And what he didn't realize was that Derek Bailey already did not play notated music at all anymore. Of course, he was very good at playing notated music. That had been his job. But, you know, pretty well overnight, he just said, I'm not doing this anymore. So he didn't really play. He came up to York and played Neil's piece, but really, he just played what he wanted to play. And then at the end of the concert, there's a line. It's sort of new pieces by students, and then a big line, and then in small letters in italics, like it wasn't important. Oh, and then Derek Bailey will play some music, some improvisation, whatever that is, kind of thing, you know.
Yeah.
In fact, that record, I mean, they found a tape. It's actually come out of his solo in York University.
Really? Oh man, I have to.
I think so. I think Honest John's put it out. Honest John's is my local record shop, and it's one of the best record shops in the world. All sorts of music, and they did a whole series reissues of Derek Bailey records.
Really? Oh man, I have to find it. Okay.
Oh, check it out. Yeah. So they're all a lot of classic Incas records, but with maybe another record of stuff you've never heard before.
Yeah.
And beautifully produced, very carefully produced. So yeah, anyway. So that was the first time we had somebody up, and then we started doing, I teamed up with a French horn player called Martin Mays, who now lives in Italy, I think. And plays French horn and plays free improvisation. And we started presenting improvised music at York University. So we had Derek Bailey and Han Bennink. That was the first time I saw Han.
That's how you connected with Han. Okay.
That was pretty, yeah. I'm very proud of this. I don't know whether, I guess we must have got some money from the Students' Union or something. But then Central Hall at York University, I saw The Who. You know, I saw Roland Kirk there. Really? I mean, they had amazing things. You would never, dream of that happening there. Yeah. I think The Who was the day after they recorded live at Leeds. They did a gig at York. That's usually what happened. I saw lots of people. Wow. But I specifically remember The Who were fantastic, and Roland Kirk, who was great, of course. So anyway, so yes, so there was a lot of good music going on at York University. So we had Derek and Han, we had Evan Parker and Paul Litton, we had Peter Grossman and Fred Van Hove. Maybe we had a couple more.
Oh,
but and so I got to know these people, and then I go to London and go to the little theatre club, which was run by John Stevens, which was indeed a very, very small place. And there I met Terry Day. I met the people who were more like my age.
Yeah.
Dave Solomon, Nigel Coombes, John Russell, Gary Todd, people like that. And they were playing there. And then there were other gigs already. But the little theatre club was a very important, centre. It was in the middle of, also it was in the West End. It was in the middle of London.
Yeah.
This very rarely happens now.
Oh, sure.
There's very, very little experimental music going on in the middle of London. It's all in Dalston in East London. That's okay.
No, sure. But when you moved to London, did you? I mean, I know you started then playing with Company, and those records like late '70s that you guys did together with Eric, and Michel is one there, and so amazing players. I love that. Yeah, it is amazing. And
yeah, I'm glad you like it. Yes, thank you.
Like when you moved to London, did you immediately start getting gigs, or like how was that the London integration for you?
Well, yeah, I was already playing. I get the midnight coach. I was playing in a wine bar or something. I think it was a kind of wine bar. And so I was playing, Cole Porter tunes and things on the piano, and then I'd get out of that gig as quickly as possible and get the midnight coach from York to London. That was horrible. I mean, it was the cheapest way to go. But in those days, you could smoke anywhere. So this is a coach filled with people smoking for about 8 hours. It was vile. It was just awful. But it was the cheapest way to get to London. So I'd go to London and I'd maybe stay at where did I stay? I think I stayed in the Finchley Road where Nigel Coombes was and a few other. But also already there was a connection with what they called experimental music, which was like Gavin Bryars, all those people, Michael Nyman, because I'd been asked to be in the Portsmouth Sinfonia, which was the world's worst orchestra. And this was great for me because I'd been terrible at playing in symphony orchestras. I was like the world's worst trumpet player. And I was terrible. And so I hated it. But in the Portsmouth Sinfonia, it didn't matter how terrible you were. So that was great. So I had a connection with that scene, as well, which I still slightly have. I mean, I know people in that scene and occasionally Howard Skempton, people like that.
Yeah.
Might do something. It's very nice.
Mm.
So already there were various different things going on. And yeah, I think even Dalston already had, I think there was a kind of political bookshop on the main drag in Dalston, and there was a basement. I remember we did some gigs there.
Mm.
You know, you might do something at some weird event in a university or something. So yeah, I think I started getting gigs quite quickly, actually. Yes.
Mm. What about the company, you know, with Derek? How did you get, I mean, obviously you knew now Derek from York, and
Yes.
but your involvement with him, and how was it like working with that group? I mean, it's one of the classic free jazz or improvised music groups, let's put it like that. I mean, how was that experience for you?
Oh, it was fantastic. I met all these people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the first time I played with Han Bennink was in company. Tristan Honsinger. I mean, we made a record quite early on, a duo record. We borrowed the piano at the ICA. They just said, yeah, you can come and you play the piano if you want. So I took a very good cassette recorder, really upmarket cassette recorder, and we recorded some duos, and then and that came out. So yeah, now we're talking about another scene, because one of the things about company is it attracted people who wouldn't normally go to those kind of gigs. So for instance, Viv Albertine from the Slits, which was this post-punk band, which was mainly women. She came to the gigs, and she kind of, you noticed her because nobody dressed like that and went to improvised music gigs, you know. So I got to know her. So one of the things that was happening was that Dick O'Dell, who was the sound guy for the Slits, and I think he managed the pop group or something, who was a kind of related group. They had the same drummer at a certain point. So Dick O'Dell had a label called Y Records, which put out a pop group and maybe a sort of cassettes of the Slits practicing or something. I can't remember. And so the record with Tristan came on that label. I did two other records on that label, one of which was also Tristan with Toshinori Kondo and David Toop. And then we had a band. So very quickly I met people and things started happening. So we had a band that was formed at the Brighton Festival because we were playing to nobody and we thought we need to get out. And Brighton's by the sea, famously. And so we formed a group. Lowell Coxhill was in the group. He was the main guy. And David Toop, Max Eastley, who's an instrument maker. Terry Day was in it. Peter Cusack on guitar, and Paul Burwell on drums. If Paul was in the group, Terry would play cello. And we played popular medleys of all sorts of, Albert Ayler and Nelly the Elephant, and stuff like that. So we recorded that, and that came out. It was called the Promenaders, and we all had pseudonyms in it. So that, mainly medleys of completely unrelated tunes, and which we did definitely start out playing on the Promenade, which is why we would call it Promenade. So yes, for instance, so there were the records on Y Records. The first record that I did really actually I did one for Trevor Wishart in York University, but I just played a plastic trumpet for about 30 seconds. But I think that was the first record I was on. But then the first free improvisation record that I was on was called Tea Time. And that was with the people you just mentioned, John Russell, Dave Solomon, Nigel Coombes, and Gary Todd.
You have to find that one. I haven't heard that one yet.
Oh, really?
No, I have to find it.
I think it stands up. I think there's still some very interesting things going on in that record.
Yeah, I have to find it.
It's very beautifully re-released by Martin Davison on M&M.
Okay, I'll find it. I'll try to find it.
We all have of course, there's pictures of us. Our haircuts are just terrible. We're wearing flared trousers. You know, I showed it to a friend of mine. She said, "Oh my God, your posture was terrible. And look at that hair. Oh my God." So anyway, but that was the first improvised music record. And so you can get a very nice edition. So M&M record, Martin Davis.
I'll try to find it.
I think it's worth listening to. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really curious, you know, in these beginnings, kind of in a way, it's when it was happening.
Well, yeah, it was already, you see, it was already the pattern that people, particularly of the second generation, as we're called, all played in different combinations. Actually, I was particularly interested in a quartet that I think I'd put together, I can't really remember, called the Four Pullovers, except when there were only three people, and then it was called the Three Pullovers. So that was Terry Day, but he didn't play kit at all. He used to have just Coke cans and a little tiny cymbal. And what else did he have? I can't remember, but he would put it on a sofa. He liked gigs where there was a sofa because he could put his small percussion on there. And Roger Smith, who played left-handed acoustic Spanish guitar, clearly coming out of Derek, but already playing very differently to Derek. One of my favorite guitarists. And Nigel Coombes on the violin, but also we used very, I didn't play much piano per se on that. I had like toy pianos, a little amp, kind of 3-watt battery amp with a contact mic, and Nigel also. We got feedback, very quiet feedback. I've always liked quiet feedback. I haven't, you know, because it's always, you think it's very loud, but feedback can be very quiet.
Oh, actually. Sure. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I really like that band, and we recorded that band, and that also came out. Martin Davison finally put that out by the Three Pullovers. Terry wasn't in most of it. It's called 3 and 4 Pullovers.
Okay.
And that, now I listen to that and go, yeah, we didn't sound like anybody else. You know, we had a much more unusual sound than we knew we had. I think it was, it sort of preempted different things that followed on. And I think that stands up. And it was more of a band. It wasn't so much a pickup group. I mean, sometimes a band can stay together and they kind of feed into each other's narcissism. You know, it becomes kind of cult. I mean, I've seen this happen. And the people in the band think that they're changing the world, and everybody outside the band thinks they're a bit boring. You know, so that didn't happen because we didn't do enough gigs for that to happen. But it does happen. I can see the disadvantages of that.
Yeah, definitely.
And when people say, "Oh, you must have been playing together for a long time," actually, that's very often true. I mean, many of the people I've mentioned, I played with for 40 years. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that is. You know?
Yeah. But you know, one of the bands I liked the most, and we only really did about half a dozen gigs, was with Toshinori Kondo and Eugene Chadbourne. And Toshinori Kondo came. Eugene just said, "Oh, you'll like this guy. He's great."
How did you connect with Eugene, by the way? Also,
how did I hook up? I mean, this is another story, which is the Americans coming to London.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. Yeah, like, you know, with John Zorn and all these guys.
Okay,
yeah.
This is another thing. Okay, we had a magazine called Music's Magazine. Finally, it was all put out again by Thurston Moore and Eva Prinz on a huge book, enormous book, which costs £100, and that's all the issues of Music's. I think there were 23. And one of the things Music's did, it was very much devoted to improvised music, but we did talk about other things. And it got to Americans, and they started coming over. So Charles Kane Noyes came really quite early, a percussionist, very nice guy. Yeah, the guitar, what's his name? The guitarist. Various people showed up, and Eugene Chadbourne was one of those.
Okay.
And Toshinori Kondo had recently moved to New York. So Eugene just said, "Oh, let's do a trio." And I don't know how I did it. I fixed up a tour of the UK. So Kondo flies from New York to London. Then we get on a train and we go to York, which was a nice thing. So I'd never heard the guy. His English wasn't so great in those days. And the trio just worked. It just worked. So sometimes, you know, people could have said, "Oh, these people must have been playing for years," but it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, sure.
You can have somebody from thousands of miles away who doesn't really speak your language, you've never met before, and you just go, "Wow, that works." And it's kind of like magic.
Yeah, it is.
There are things that happen in the music that you go, "Well, that's just magical. How did that happen? That's amazing."
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes it's whatever the opposite to magic is. Sometimes you put a band together and it's terrible. So that does happen as well.
Yeah.
But not that often, you know.
Yeah. Usually in improvised music, it more or less, if musicians decide on themselves to put the band together, I mean, a gig, then it works. Sometimes I had occasions when promoters put us together thinking of that, you know, this will work. And I remember, I will not name, but like I had some improvised gigs and it was just like, man, this is...
No, exactly, absolutely. So you play? Do you play then?
Yeah, I'm a guitar player. I'm a guitarist.
Oh, right, okay.
With him, you know, improvised
right.
music and jazz and everything. So
yeah, I've been in bands where everybody in the band is good, but it just doesn't happen.
Yeah. The click is not there.
Nobody's fault. It's just, it's not there. Yeah.
Yeah, bizarre.
That is interesting as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, but usually when musicians decide on themselves, I think it always works somehow. I don't know. Even if you haven't played with someone, you kind of feel, okay, this might.
Yeah, but I think that's great that we do that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Equally. Yeah. I mean, for instance, Mark Sanders, I think, is a fantastic drummer.
Oh yeah, I love him. Yeah.
He's very busy now, which is brilliant. But we've never played that much together, actually. We're playing next week with Sarah Gale Brand's quartet. Yeah, it's a quartet with John Edwards.
Super.
And they're a kind of classic duo.
Oh anyway, man, it's like...
with Sarah on bass. So that'll be great. That'll be at Cafe Auto.
Fantastic.
And some of those people, yeah, I've worked, but not consistently. I've never been on tour with them, for instance. Like you did mention touring. I really never toured.
I mean, but you did come to Europe already, like to the continent, in like in the 70s already, or like in the 80s?
In the 70s, Alterations, which was the group, David Toot, Terry Day, and Peter Cusack and me. That we toured quite a lot then, actually. Yes.
Yeah.
But it wasn't kind of like 25 gigs. It was more like 4 gigs or something. I mean, it wasn't like a huge thing. I mean, I see people and they've been touring for months, you know, and I keep wondering, what do they do about their underwear? I mean, if you're in a different place, you know, you get to the hotel, maybe you do it in the sink really quickly and hang it up.
Yeah.
But then you have to get up at 8 o'clock in the morning to go somewhere else. Does it dry? I don't know.
Hair dryers. I've heard stories. People put on hair dryers and leave it on for hours.
But I asked Peter Brotzmann, because Peter Brotzmann, every time I saw him, he had an absolutely perfect white shirt on, like he just put it on. It wasn't crumpled. It was absolutely clean. Looked very smart. And I said, how do you do that? You've been on tour for 3 weeks. How do you know, there's not time to give the shirt to the laundry in the hotel, if there is one, and get it back before you leave. I don't know. He wouldn't tell me. It's another
The secret. Yeah, the well-kept secret, right?
Or you schlep an awful lot of shirts, but that, yeah, I don't get it. Anyway, they do it. They somehow manage to do it.
But this American connection, like, so all these guys started to come into London. That's how also that, like, with Zorn happened, the Deadly Weapons thing. And
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
How did I know Zorn? I mean, it must have been the first time I went over to the States. We went to New York.
Where was that?
Oh, you see, my dates.
Approximately.
Oh, okay. I mean, do you know this book, by the way?
No. Oh man.
Oh, you don't know it.
Oh, no, wait. I have to write it down. Piano, just a second. Piano, stories.
So, okay. Well, you should know about that because, you know, there'll be lots of questions answered.
Oh man, super.
And it has a really good discography. Okay, I've just come to it all immediately. The English Channel, Parachute, Eugene Chadbourne, 1979. So I was in New York in 1979 with David Toop and Nigel Coombes. Nigel and I had just recorded on the third Portsmouth Symphonia album, which was for Philips, I think. It's called 20 Classic Rock Classics. So we were doing pseudo classical versions of popular songs, like Bridge Over Troubled Waters, I think we did.
Oh, wow, really? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and things like that. So we actually got paid. So we bought tickets to New York, and we got there, and there was a Giorgio Gomelsky, the late Giorgio Gomelsky, had a sort of downtown club called Zoo, Z-U, and it didn't have a brick wall at the back. It didn't have a wall. They had a curtain, and when you opened it, you just saw the outside. It was
wow, that's bizarre.
So I mean, Kondo was there. Zorn. I met Zorn. Fred Frith was there. It was great. It was fantastic. We had such a great time. Eugene, of course, was there. And so, yeah, Zorn came over. Deadly Weapons was a little later.
Yeah, that's like mid-80s, I think. Yeah.
We did a project for NATO Records, which is this French label run by Jean Rochard. I think it still exists. And he said, "Oh, I think you should do it." Jean had actually, he's one of the few people who isn't a musician who had good musical ideas. So one of them was putting together the Melody 4, which was a trio of myself, Tony Coe, and Lol Coxell, sometimes with Jean Rochard's father, Yves Rochard, who might play the violin or just say something in French or something. So, one of the one-off projects was a quartet. So Jean said, "Oh, I think you should do a record with Toop and Zorn and I think you need a woman actress. I think I'm going to find you an actress." So he got Toni Marshall, who passed about 3 years ago, I think. And it turned out, she was an actress. At that time, she was an actress, and then she became a director. She directed several films. And it turned out she actually had a very nice voice. So that was a one-off we did in Dave Hunt's studio. Dave Hunt is one of those names that you will see on the back of many, many, many records, because he's a very, very good conventional engineer, sound engineer, but he understands how improvised music works.
Yeah.
Which is, number one, we have no money. Number two, we don't want to fuck around for 12 hours setting up mics. Please, could you do it very quickly? Number three, we really like drinking coffee. Those things.
Man, this is like the Bible now.
Yeah, exactly. So, you get there at 11 in the morning, you'd set up, he had a downstairs live room, which I've seen kind of 15-piece bands in there, but that's a squash. And he'll set up mics. By the time you got your stuff out, it'll be ready to go. You play for an hour and a half.
That's it. Yeah.
It always, you don't worry about it. He's like the Rudy Van Gelder of improvised music, actually. You don't worry about listening to it. It's going to be fine. You know it's going to be fine. And even the rough mixes are pretty good, you know. But that's when you use the studio. Of course, increasingly you don't use a studio.
Yeah, just live gigs. Yeah, I mean, financially, it's yeah.
He has a strong relationship again with Gavin Bryars, I think, but also with Max Eastley. Max does installations in art galleries. Very often, Dave Hunt can kind of do anything that involves sawing bits of wood up, and as well as all as actually doing the sound and things, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's an important person who's kind of in the middle of a lot of projects in a way. Yeah. And I knew him. Okay, here's another thread. From Berry Street Studios, which was a reggae studio. So when I started working with the Slits, they introduced me to Adrian Sherwood, who's a kind of dub guy who has a label on you. And I started doing sessions with Adrian Sherwood, including one with the late Prince Farai. And that was somebody phoned me in the morning. Well, he phoned me, I think, and said, "Oh, come and do some overdubs for this dub album with Prince Farai." So I rang up David Toot and we brought some stuff, and they just threw tracks at us. We had headphones on. We just did stuff. And again, it was very fast. And it became Cry Tough Dub Encounter Chapter 3, which I think is a really good album. I'm not on every track or anything, but I'm very happy to be involved in that.
I have to find it. Okay.
Yeah, Prince Farai, Cry Tough Dub Encounter Chapter 3. I can't remember what label it's on. It's probably still on you, but I think it originally came out. Yeah, it originally came out on Dub. Was it called Dub Vendor? No, there was another reggae shop right in the middle of London, run by Steve Barrow, who's an enormous. He posts stuff on Facebook the whole time. He must have the world's greatest record collection. He constantly tells me about jazz, tells everybody who reads it about a really good jazz saxophone player you've never heard of.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah.
He has all the records, you know. But he used to work at Trojan Records at one point, which is the very successful reggae label. Up the road from where I am. I'm in West London. I'm in W10. And there are all sorts of music connections around here. There was a very famous studio next to Holland Park.
One thing I wanted to ask you, one of my favorite albums and groups was Fox is Fox. And
yeah,
that was a group, right? You said you never...
Oh, no, that was a group.
That was a group, right?
Evan does that. I think it's one of Evan's things.
Yeah.
That he will work quite intensely with a particular group of people. And then you won't get a phone call for the next 5 years, kind of thing. So,
how did that one happen? I mean, and
sorry,
how did that one happen? That group? I mean,
okay. What happened was that the old Vortex, which is in Stoke Newington in East London, I went there hundreds of times probably because I really liked it. I thought it was a great room, and Evan had been working very hard on building an audience for free improvisation for him. Yeah. So he would do a gig very often there, which ended up, I mean, now free improvisation is kind of central to the Vortex, but at that time it was more, I don't know, you might get somebody who does kind of Broadway songs or something.
Really? Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. No, that's nice. I like that stuff. I think that's fine. And then conventional jazz, and then slightly out jazz, but not much free improvisation. And Evan was very much the person, you know, because he works for years at stuff. He, you know, he will do it until it works. So he played and played and played and played there, and then it became one of the central things. And I went to see him when he was doing a group with Louis Maholo and John Edwards. And John had just come back. I think he came back from New Zealand, and he got a bug. And he was, you know, John Edwards works incredibly hard. He had, I mean, the joke is he has 5 gigs a day. I don't think he's ever had that, but you know.
But yeah, I know.
He did 2 this morning and 2 this afternoon, and then he. But there certainly was a point where he was at the Vortex for the first set, and then ran across the road to Cafe Oto and did another set with, you know, both. Yeah, amazing. Anyway, so he did the first set with Lewis and Evan, but then he said, you know what, I'm really ill. I have to go home. So Evan said, Steve, would you sit in for the second set playing piano? So I did that. He said, oh, that was really good. So that became Fox's Fox. Yeah. We did 3 albums, I think, altogether. Yeah. And that meant I got to play with Louis Maholo. I mean,
yeah, man.
Evan is great, but I'd done that. But playing with Louis was amazing. You know,
yeah.
I always remember a previous gig in the Vortex, and Louis was playing incredibly. He always plays incredibly. And there was a piano player who I thought, that piano player doesn't seem to want to play with Louis. That's not fair. I really want to play with Louis, but this guy seems like he thinks Louis is a pain in the ass. But you know, why is he playing like that? You know, and I never figured it out. But anyway, I did get to play with Louis, and also did, you know, various projects with him. So that was fantastic.
Yeah, I think he's one of the most underrated drummers out there. You know, it's like,
well,
maybe on the British scene, people know him, of course, but like, still, I think he's,
No, I mean, if you go back to listen to those Brotherhood of Breath records, particularly, what's that tune? I think it's called Mra. And he just goes baka, 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 baka all the way through. And he's a groove player as well.
Yeah,
There's
sure.
very few drummers I know who are such impeccable groove players, such inspirational groove players, and also play inspirational, not groove,
improvised, yeah,
and can move from one to the other, you know, and that's exceptional. It's amazing. Yeah, everything Louis does has got some such intelligence behind it, and he's great at putting bands together. You know, he's the one who told me about Jason Yard. He said there's this alto player called Jason Yard, and I went to see Jason and went, yeah, he's amazing. He's recovering from a stroke at the moment. There was a huge thing. Actually, there were 3 gigs that all happened at once. One in the new Vortex, one in a place called the Servant Jazz Quarters that does great cocktails, by the way, and one in Cafe Oto. Because these are only 2-3 minutes between them.
Yeah.
Orphy Robinson organized this thing. We'd already put money in to help Jason get over, you know, he obviously needs money to live. And he had a pretty serious stroke. And then we did this thing where people moved from venue to venue. It was kind of amazing. It was great. I had some wonderful music. Anyway, to get back to this, so from quite an early age, I think he was in his early 20s, Jason, when he joined Louis Maholo's group. And and Louis is wonderful at putting bands together. And he has people like, I mean, most people don't really know about Alan Tomlinson. I think Alan Tomlinson a great musician, a wonderful improviser, very funny, and fantastic chops, and just really easy to work with.
Yeah,
and
that's important. Yeah.
And he sounds amazing with Luz Maholo. And he will always say, "No, I'm not. I don't play jazz. I don't play jazz. I don't know anything about jazz." He knows about free improvisation, and he knows about orchestral music and things like that. But he doesn't. Yeah, but in fact, you can stick him in a jazz group, and he sounds amazing. So
yeah, sure. Speaking of drummers, you know, there's a lot of footage. I mean, quite some of you and Han Bennink playing duo.
Yeah.
How do you approach those gigs with Han? Because you know, I've seen him live so many times, and it's always a surprise factor. Like when I watched it, it's like, man, what is he gonna do now? And you're there, like, you know, playing.
Yeah.
And...
No, you have to be okay. So one of the things I learned about preparing for that is that you don't drink more than maybe one glass of wine.
Smart.
Han is fairly used to, you know, imbibing a small amount before he goes on stage. I'm not really. And you have to be really, it's like you have to have all your wits about you, as they say, with Han, because he will capture you and put you in the corner, and you can't escape. It's really weird feeling. I mean, he's the most generous person. But he's a physical player.
Yeah.
If you're not loud enough, that's too bad. I mean, I've seen sets with the wonderful late Michel Engelberg. I mean, that's one of my favorite groups in the world anyway. And I've seen Han be so loud for a whole set, and you can't hear a note that Michel plays for the whole set. And of course, you know, if somebody wrote a rules for free improvisers, number one would be you must never play louder than everybody else. That's very naughty. And of course, Han will do that for a whole set, and still a great set. And you can watch Misha. I mean, I would watch his cigarette. He used to smoke a cigarette, and it would just stay in the mouth, and more ash would come until the whole cigarette was ash. And it's like, how did it not fall off onto the keyboard? All this, it was amazing. There were lots of things, and he would always wear a horrible jumper. I'm sure he wore them deliberately. They're awful jumpers, and and of course his posture was much worse, awful. But a fantastic piano player.
Oh man, I love this. Yeah, amazing.
I mean, inspirational piano player. Yeah. And so yes, sometimes you could see a set and Han would be just so loud. I mean, of course, it wasn't loud by rock and roll standards.
No, but for jazz and acoustic, definitely. Yeah. When was the first duo you played? When was that approximately?
No idea. I'm hopeless. I have to go back to this book. Really, this is the thing.
I really have. Can you buy it like on Amazon or something, or?
Yeah, but don't get the hardback because it's ridiculously expensive.
Okay.
Get the paperback.
Paperback. Okay, super.
It's published by what are they called? Bloomsbury, okay. And it's they see this as an academic book. I don't think it's academic at all, but that meant that they charged a lot of money for the hardback. But the paperback is like 25 quid.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, I love reading these books. You know, I'm with music, so beautiful. I didn't know about it. I have to check it out.
Yeah, I think Andy Hamilton. We must have met like 12 times. I don't know, maybe 20 times. And he put it together. I think he did an amazing job. He did beautiful. Previous to this book, he did one of interviews with Lee Konitz, which is amazing. I mean, I bought that book and I just keep going back to it because there's so many ideas and it's brilliant. I love Lee Konitz.
Yeah, man. Oof, sure.
And so we did this in the same format, which is interviews or conversations, really.
Sure,
and then also talking to people. I mean, there's a guy I've never actually met who wrote a piece about toy pianos in this. It's like a page or so. Very, very interesting. I can't remember his name. I had to look it up. But beautiful, really, really lovely. So, okay, so I'm looking for, where does Han Bennink come in? No, can't so much.
Probably like late 70s, right? Early 80s or something.
Yeah, you'd think, wouldn't you? I
Yeah.
can't find it. That's weird. I think
like,
it was the late 70s. Yeah.
But
yeah.
this first gigs that you played with him, what was it? I mean, obviously you knew his playing.
You're breaking up a bit.
Oh, sorry. Like this first gigs that you
Yes.
played with him. I mean, obviously you knew his playing, right, and his style. But
yes,
was it surprising still for you when improvising with him?
yes,
Yeah, right.
yeah.
I can
Yeah,
imagine
he's
that.
always surprising. I mean, one of the things I didn't want to do was to be like a bad version of Misha.
Sure.
Because I'd seen Misha and Han together, and I had the records, the ICP records. I would order them, and so I knew those records very well, and I absolutely adored them. And I thought, how do I play with Han and not sound like a bad version of Misha? So there was that, you know. But yes, he's always, of course, he's always surprising.
Yeah,
yes.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Steve, not to take more of your time, I just wanted to ask you one more question, which was like, how did you get involved in that Butch Morris thing, the Testament project?
Yeah.
And working with him, I mean, you know, he's for me one of the greats of conducting such large ensembles. And
well, yeah, that was what Butch wanted to do. Yeah. To the point where he didn't play the cornet anymore, which I thought was a great pity. I mean, that Cassandra Wilson, he's on one track of that Cassandra Wilson record. I can't remember which one. It's a Blue Note one, and she does this song called "Love Is Blindness." That's
Love Is Blindness. Yeah, I know. The New Moon Daughter, I think that's the record. I think.
Thank you. Yes, yeah. It's that. I think it's that one. Yes, thanks. And he just plays this extraordinary solo in the middle, which it just permeates the rest of the album. You know, what is that? That's extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
It's so delicate and vulnerable. It sounds very vulnerable. It's extraordinary, and you know, why? Damn, he gave up playing the cornet.
Yeah, interesting.
Conductor. So anyway, I saw when I was in New York, because I went over like a few times, and I went to see Butch Morris doing a conduction, which I really liked, and then following on from that, an Irish trumpet player who's in the London Improvised Orchestra, which is something we haven't talked about, but we can't talk about everything.
Yeah, sure. It's like a short snippet today.
Yeah, he's a trumpet player, Ian Smith, who passed away a couple of years ago now. But he said, why don't we do a tour? This is before the London Improvised Orchestra. He said, why don't we do a tour we put a band together here, and we get Butch Morris to do a tour with conduction, and Evan Parker was part of that. So the three of us put our heads together, and I kind of fixed the band.
Okay.
One of the things I'd noticed was that it was very diverse. There were lots of women musicians. There were different ages. There were black players. There were white players. And I thought that was all really healthy and that we should do that. So we did bring in lots of, that's how I met Orphy Robinson. I just rang up Orphy because Butch said, I want a vibraphone player. And I didn't really know many vibraphone players. So I rang up Orphy Robinson. And Orphy said, oh, thank you for asking me. I never get asked to do those kind of gigs. And since then, I mean, he's been involved in free improvisation a lot, but he still does, you know, popular music and lots of other things. But so it was great to get Orphy involved, for instance. And yeah, we did have a very diverse band, and some of them really hated it. And there's some of them really loved it. And then a year after that tour, we decided we wanted our own orchestra using conduction, but in a slightly different way. So for instance, anybody who's in the orchestra can also conduct if they want. And also there's a few people who don't even play in the orchestra but love conducting. Ashley Wales is the obvious example. So that grew out of Butch Morris's thing. We still basically do Butch Morris conduction, but we have things that he didn't use. And most of the stuff he did use, we don't use at all. Yeah. Because there's hundreds of them. I can't remember them.
Sure.
That's fine. You know, but you can do it with one. I mean, there's a guy, is his name Marcus? It could be Marcus Eichenberger. I can't remember. But I think he's Swiss, and he only has his only cue that he ever uses is a downbeat, which means music change. Yeah. So that's Zorn had it actually in Cobra. He had a music change. Basically, it's like a tape edit.
Yeah.
So the music just suddenly changes to sort of different music, and that's the only thing he does. This guy, it might be Marcus Eichenberger, or it could be somebody else. I can't remember. But that we incorporated that, for instance, in the LIO. I'm sure Butcher's got that one in. I have the book of all the signals.
Okay.
But honest, I've never read it from cover to cover.
Sure.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there, you know.
Yeah.
And I deal with about 10 things at once, really. So yeah, but that's an ongoing project. That's an ongoing project, and of course we play in Stoke Newington. Inevitably, there's a church. There are two churches. They're right next to Clissold Park, and one of them is an incredibly old church, very, very old church. But it's a little small for the orchestra, and the other is a very large church, and it's certainly the right size for the orchestra, but it's so cold. I mean, this is a huge church. It would cost hundreds of pounds.
To heat up,
Just on a completely logistic level, we can't afford to play there in the winter, but we play there in the summer. And then sometimes we play Cafe Otto, you know, so we get around a little bit. Yeah. So that's another project which is very much ongoing. And I suppose it's a set group in terms of it being called the London Improvised Orchestra, but the number of people who pass through that orchestra is huge.
That's so nice,
There's never a time when you get the same exact the same people from one gig to another. It's always different.
That's beautiful, actually. Yeah,
it's fantastic. And we have people just passing through, people who get very, very involved. At the moment, there's lots of women singers. One's an opera singer, one's sort of self-taught, one's from Pakistan, you know. So very different vocal traditions, and they're fantastic. And we never really had a set group of singers in the band, but it feels right at the moment to do that. No, so
that's quite cool.
Yeah. So a whole bunch of different people.
Yeah,
and that's obviously very healthy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Steve, just to end it, like to wrap it up, like what's on the schedule for the new year? By the way, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, like what do you have until the summer? What are the things that are happening?
Well, not much. If you got a gig for me,
okay, Okay.
Yeah, I have a pretty empty diary, but as I said, I'm doing the thing with Sarah Gale's
Yeah.
band on the 9th at Oto. That would be great. Yeah, I think there are things coming up. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Cool.
But yeah, there's no enormous tours or
Yeah,
massive
no,
projects.
sure.
I have a record. Elliot Sharp asked me to do a record, and I had some recordings of myself with Pat Thomas, who's also a piano player.
Yeah, I love Pat. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, we've done trio. We had a trio record with Berry and Weston. I mean, 3 pianos, which is very I'm sure you know, to find a studio with 3 decent pianos is almost unheard of. So that's a very old record. It's probably 25 years old. But Pat and I recently did. There's a place called Eclectic, which unusually is not in Dalston. It's south of the river, near Waterloo. Very, very beautiful room. Also great acoustic. And they had a kind of not very great piano, and they got a new piano. So we did it. They asked myself and Pat to do an evening where we kind of christened the new piano and said the new piano. So that was recorded. So most of it, I think, is from that night. And then there's one where we share a piano, because that's the other thing. You can have 2 people playing one piano, especially if you have a long seat. I have a Zimmermann East German piano, and which I bought for very reasonable amount of money. I'm very happy with it. And they rang me up and said, "Oh, you need a seat, but we only had a duet seat. It's called a duet seat, which I think is rather beautiful." I said, "A duet seat is great. I like playing duets." So yeah, I have a duet seat at home, and you can get up to 3 piano players on a piano at once. I have done that, and
really?
Then you can have
that's beautiful.
Then you could have a couple around the edge just playing the inside.
Yeah, exactly.
So you could probably do it with 5 or 6, But anyway, Pat and I have had a recurring, as usual, once a year or something. We do a duet, but over the years it becomes kind of traditional.
Yeah.
So, and he's a very different piano player to me.
Yeah, that's nice.
That's coming out on Elliot Sharp's label.
Oh wow, beautiful.
Yeah. That's nice to have a relationship with Elliot Sharp, because I think he's a great musician.
Oh man, fantastic.
Very guy. Yes. Well, of course you're a guitarist, so yeah.
Very unique.
He's a very special guitarist, I think.
Yeah.
And again, I've known him for years without ever working. I don't think I've ever played. Maybe I've never played with him. I'll have to think about that. But I've seen, if he comes to London, I see him.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Great, Steve. I mean, thanks for sharing some of these stories. I mean, I'll buy the book, by the way. So definitely, I didn't know about it.
Buy the book. Yeah,
I will.
I mean, well, let me also show you this while we're at it, which is a book. Okay, it looks very plain. I know. So it's a project that I had with Christian Markley over lockdown. But he took these pictures. Here's one on his walk from his house to where he has his studio, and he'd send me the picture. He'd email me the picture, and then I would record an improvisation and send that to him, which was somehow something to do with the picture or not. I just did it on my iPhone.
Oh, fantastic.
So everything was just iPhones, so it's very, very straightforward. So yeah, I think the book is great. So
I have to find it. Yeah, also I'll check.
Published by a New York publisher called Siglio, and so it's a completely different book to this one.
Yeah, definitely. I can imagine. Yeah.
They're pretty well the same price, interestingly. So yeah.
That's cool. It's like, buy these books. It's like one of those.
Buy these books.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's
like,
those commercials, kind of. You won't regret it.
If you don't find them, we can sort something out. Where